Hi everyone. This is a type of Googology video I thought I never had to make, but I found something I wanted to share with you. One night, when I was about to sleep, I thought about the weird numberoids that would be cool to look at for a video. I normally never do any kind of commentary on a Googology video, like, ever. But this one is going to be an exception. There was a couple I wanted to look at, and I found 8 that would be interesting to take a look at. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. So, as you guys probably know, quantum Googology is a Googology type that has small numbers called quantum numbers between 0 and 1. But some of you know that meta-quantum Googology covers the entire number line, so there can be 2oids, 3oids, etc. But what you may not know about is that there can even be quantum numbers smaller than 0 itself, their name, zeroids. Zeroids are not like your typical quantum number, though. There are zeroids that are positive, but others are in the negatives. One such zeroid that is positive and is the smallest is GNL center. It's the middle point between negativology and metaquantum Googology. Now, you may know my metaquantum Googology path uses quantum variants of normal Googolisms and fictional Googology numbers. But what I figured out is that my onioids actually secretly utilize their zeroid counterparts. The only problem, they haven't been discovered when I was making my path. Now, I'm already dealing with chapter 1 and chapter -1 at the same time, but if you'd want me to make my own zeroids, let me know. I would love to finally fill in the gap for the mystery of Monero's scale. But that is the only one from this video that I will consider doing, as the next one is already going to be cursed. Get ready. Honestly, this was the main numberoid that even made me want to make this video in the first place, so where do we start here? If you are a fictional Googologist and you never even heard of not a number, or non, in the first place, I wouldn't blame you, since this is mainly for programming math and not for Googology. Non is a value that represents an undefined or unrepresentable vol, often resulting from floating point operations that can't produce a valid number, like for example, 0 divided by 0. In other words, it is not a real number, isn't bigger nor smaller than any number, including fictional Googology, and is otherwise there so it can be distinguished from results that lead to infinity. So, if nothing can be smaller than non, what does this leave us with nonoids in metaquantum Googology? Well, since non is scaleless, then the nonoids are just as scaleless as non itself, can't be smaller or bigger than non, and can't be defined like non. Now, you could just bend the rules of non and make the nonoids smaller than non, but this will just make a fictional version of non, which ruins the point in non. So, how about we just not touch non ever, and move on to something that can be touched? Honestly, I wanted to make this as an April Fool's joke for this year, until nonoids got in my head, so I was like, alright, let's just put it here anyway, what's the harm? So what we're dealing with here is a real number and an imaginary number. Both can't be added together. There's answers on Quora that show why this is the case. For the purpose of this video, it is assumed you know what real and imaginary numbers are. So, how these complex numbers increment depends on what value you want to increment. You can add 1 so this becomes 3 to I, or I, which gives us to plus 3i. Since metaquantum Googology is about making smaller quantum numbers of a specified value, you could go either way with this one. This might be easy on paper, until you realize there's a lot more quantum number possibilities than you can imagine. 3 to I, 2 plus 3i, 3 plus 3i, there's so many directions that can be taken with this one. Heck, you can even make quantum numbers for numbers like 2 to I plus 2j and such. If you ever find yourself having lack of spots for unique quantum numbers, think again about complex numbers. I can imagine someone out there going to have a field day with this one. There's just so many possible naming systems that are out there. I wonder who will find that ... Remember when I mentioned infinity when I was talking about nonoids? Let's talk more about that here, which includes infinitoids. It should be noted that infinity isn't a true number, it's a concept of infinite things. Infinity plus anything will just give out infinity. Since this is infinite space we're talking about, trying to make infinitoids without it being too fictional-like is just as hard as reaching it at all. For the programming version of infinity, after 1.79308, this could be possible. Making quantum numbers on a number just before this number overflow can happen, but I'm not the one to figure that out. We'll just have to see how quantum Googologists figure this one out. Similar story to infinitoids, making any quantum numbers happen on a cardinal just before absolute infinity is just as hard as making enough cardinals to reach absolute infinity. I do think this is even harder though, due to absolute infinity's definition. This also is the end of normal Googology and the start of fictional Googology. I don't have much to say about absolute infinitoids, but while we're on the topic of fictional Googology, making quantum numbers on absolute infinity plus 1 is possible, but you would need to be incredibly talented to figure this out. Since infinitesimal is already incredibly small, can you really do anything to make quantum numbers without it becoming a normal number? You could make the argument of actually any decimals are part of quantum Googology, but is it really part of quantum Googology? Forget about the importance for a minute. Infinitesimal is infinitely small, so is it even possible to make a starting quantum number here and get to it? We may never find out. Also, same story for absolute infinitesimal. So, we know how small zeroids can be, but what if we tried to do zeroidoids? I forgot to mention this quantum number while we were talking about zeroids, but a pernal is another zeroid, which was made by Eric's. What if we tried to make a pernaloids? Well, if you have been following my Discord server, then you would know that there can be quantum numbers between 0 and Monero, since I did say that. So, that means moneroids are possible, and as such, things like pernaloids are possible too. The question stands that, could this also be combined with the complex numbers we talked about earlier? Since metaquantum Googology is meant to cover the entire number line, any quantum number lines between each number, including complex numbers, this seems to be a yes. So, since this is the case, there can literally be an infinite amount of quantum numbers possible even with non-infinite numbers, and this can be kept on going, like, forever. Omnioidoids to plus 3 ioidoids, there's no way nothing new is nameable anytime soon. The last thing I want to talk about is fictional numbers as numberoids. Well, I already briefly mentioned absolute infinity plus 1, so that's already one, but what about the others? Some fictional numbers are pretty easy to reach, like terminusfinity, so they aren't too difficult to solve as quantum numbers. Others like never and absolute breakdown, though, can be tough to reach due to their definitions, but also their way of being reached is changing since they were first made, so those ones can be tough. There are always fictional numbers being invented, like, every day, so it may not be worth making quantum numbers on them. That's all for this one-time special video. If your curiosity got into you, you may be interested in my other videos. Now, I normally don't ask people to subscribe, it is your right after all, but only 20% of you are subscribed. If we could increment this even just a little, that would be amazing.